Tiny home living has become more than just a trend. It has become a lifestyle for many people now. And in today's video, we're covering tiny houses. With inflation and the rising cost of traditional homes and rentals, tiny homes are becoming more and more attractive. I'm Rebecca, and welcome to the channel where I teach you how to get the most out of your money. If you're interested in learning more about personal finance and growing your money exponentially, then go ahead and click that subscribe button and the notification bell below. Today, I'm teaching you about the tiny house market. We'll talk about what a tiny house is and the tiny house movement, the pros and cons, the future of tiny house living, and finally, I'll give you my thoughts about what I think you should do if you're considering buying a tiny house. Okay, so what is a tiny house anyway? While there isn't a standard measurement for a tiny house is generally considered a single-family home around 450 square feet or less. But they are functional and they are livable. Now, tiny homes have received a lot of attention and interest in the last few years. They are built in different ways, and you'll need to identify the 4 types of tiny homes to know if a specific type falls within the scope of the local building codes where you are. And the 4 types of tiny homes are: number 1, recreational vehicles. Tiny homes that are built on a utility trailer chassis with wheels are often referred to as tiny homes on wheels. Now, they're typically classified as recreational vehicles or park models. The second type of tiny home are manufactured mobile homes. Now, manufactured mobile homes are built in a factory on a metal chassis, as you see here. They have wheels and are designed to be delivered and set up on a semi-permanent foundation, even if they are generally going to be in one place. They're not going to be moved. The third type of tiny house are modular homes. Residential modular homes are fabricated or assembled wholly or in part in a manufacturing facility. They do not contain a permanent metal chassis and are fixed to a permanent foundation. And you can actually purchase these prefab tiny modular homes on Amazon and Home Depot. The fourth and most trending tiny house is site-built home. And site-built, or they're often referred to as stick-built tiny houses, are not built in a factory, but they are built from lumber on the construction site. Typically, they are built on a permanent foundation and are not designed or intended to be moved or relocated. Now, elevated traditional home prices have made the American dream of owning a home unaffordable for the average person. And right now, the mortgage rate on a conventional mortgage loan is close to 7%. In February of this year, the median sale price for a traditional home was $363,000. And in 2022, the average monthly rent price was $1,794. That is an increase of 28.5% over the prior year in 2021. And I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody who received a 28% pay increase last year. Now, people have started to weigh all of their options, and tiny houses have become very attractive to them as an alternative. And with the steady growth of tiny home dwellers, tiny house living has become a movement of sorts, but it's not a new phenomenon. Now, tiny house living has been around for decades. A gentleman by the name of J. Schaefer is largely credited with jump-starting the tiny house movement when he published his first article back in 1999 about the merits of simple living. And in the same year, he founded Tumblewood Tiny House Company in California and became the first American company to sell mobile tiny homes. The first tiny house was called Elm, and it hasn't changed since it was originally built in 1999. There was a time when tiny houses were most attractive to middle-aged adults who were looking to downsize or people who were retiring and wanted a simpler life in their older ages. But that has all changed now. Now we see more and more millennials and Gen Zs attracted to tiny houses. It gives them more financial freedom. And most new age millennials are adventurous. They value their time over space instead of having to clean and maintain a larger house. They are more interested in technology. And millennials tend to know what they want in life, and they believe this tiny lifestyle will help them to achieve more of their essential values in life, such as meaningful work, global warming, healthcare, diversity, and equality. They have a different perspective from our parents from a generation ago. So for them, it's less about space and more about their values. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of tiny house living. We'll start with the pros. The first pro is that they are more affordable than traditional home. And it's an opportunity to get home ownership quicker. For the cost of a 20% down payment on a traditional house, you can build your own tiny house and customize the design and the layout to your satisfaction. And you can actually live mortgage-free, which puts you in a great position to build wealth by taking the money that you would be paying for a mortgage and being able to save and invest that money. The second pro is that tiny homes give you more freedom to travel. And lots of people like to travel, of course. And tiny homes can be portable. And if it's built on a flatbed trailer, you can actually attach it to a truck or your SUV and carry it with you while you travel. The third pro is the cost of living is cheaper. Tiny homes are energy efficient. You don't have to contend with huge utility bills. You could even live off-grid and use solar to power your house. The fourth pro is there's less to clean. Less space also means less clutter and a smaller area that you have to maintain. There's also less space for you to have to decorate. And the fifth pro to tiny house living is tiny houses are eco-friendly. And there's less waste with a tiny house than a traditional house. It takes fewer materials to build. If you're someone who is concerned about global warming and want to reduce your carbon footprint of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane, then the tiny house will give you that. Now, these are just 5 pros of living in a tiny house. Now, let's move on and talk about the cons of living in a tiny house. The first con is that it has limited space, and that's the primary characteristic that distinguishes a tiny house from a traditional house. And there's less storage space, there's limited entertainment capacity, so you won't be able to throw large parties inside of a tiny home. The second con is resale value. Now, generally speaking, tiny homes don't appreciate in value over time. Now, if you have a tiny mobile home on wheels, it's actually going to depreciate in value over time, just like a car on wheels, a truck or travel trailer or an RV, so just keep that in mind. The third con is zoning regulations, and most cities and counties have rules that restrict tiny houses, so you'll need to check your zoning requirements in advance. Now, tiny houses are more likely to be allowed in rural areas than urban areas. Now, a lot of people will anchor their tiny house on a farm or a traditional house and use the water and electricity from that existing property to power their home. The fourth con is location, and this is a continuation of number 3 that I just gave you. Now, where to park or build your tiny house is probably going to be your greatest challenge due to zoning rules, which are not favorable, as I mentioned before. Now, there are resources available to help you in this regard. And of course, there's always word of mouth, but you can also check Craigslist. There are also Facebook pages and groups that can assist you if you are looking for a location to park or build out your tiny house. And the fifth con to tiny house living is financing it is difficult. If you choose to finance your tiny home, you need to know that getting a mortgage for a tiny home is not easy. You won't be able to get a conventional loan. Taking out a personal loan is one of the most common ways to secure financing for a tiny home. And there are also a handful of lenders that specialize in tiny homes as well. And financing can also be done through a tiny home builder. But the best option, in my opinion, is just to save, say, $50,000 or $60,000 and pay cash and just buy it outright. You can always add on, say, a porch, a deck, or additional rooms. So there I've given you 5 pros and cons of living in a tiny home. So what is the future of tiny houses? Tiny house living has evolved quite a bit over the past decade. I stumbled upon tiny house videos about 5 years ago, and I started watching just out of curiosity, and I found them to be very fascinating. And I have to admit, my first thought was, why would anybody want to live in a 200 square foot house that has a bedroom you can't even stand up in? But what I learned is that there is no one size fit all. There are different styles, as I mentioned before. And the best thing about living in a tiny house is that you get to design your own life. The tiny house you choose to build can be tailored to how you're going to use it. If you're going to be traveling with your tiny house, then a 200 square foot house makes sense because you understand that it has to fit highway travel standards. You need to make sure that it's low enough to clear on the bridges and narrow enough that it doesn't take up more than one lane on the highway. But on the other hand, you can choose to build a stationary tiny home and have it customized to the height and width that you want. And also understand that you don't have to give up luxury to live in a tiny house. The footprint might be smaller, but you can customize your tiny house to your needs and what is important to you, whether it's on wheels or if it's stationary. You can have high ceilings, a walk-in closet, full-size sink, refrigerator, bathtub, or shower. As I said before, with a tiny house, you get to design your own life. People from all walks of life or downsizers and from larger homes to tiny houses, people from different ages and stages in life. Interest, as I said before, in tiny homes is rising, and two of the main reasons are affordability and the concern about the environmental impact of constructing a traditional home. There is no concrete data on how many tiny homes there are in the United States because a lot of tiny home owners choose to live off-grid and are not likely to participate in polls and registers. And the data that we do have are from certified builders of tiny home and construction projects, which puts the estimates around about 10,000 tiny homes in the United States today. And those are just documented cases. Now, there was a time when people who lived in tiny homes were considered weird, but that's not the case anymore. In fact, tiny home communities are popping up in places you least expect. You can expect to pay considerably more for a tiny house if it's built in an urban area compared to a rural area. There are tiny home communities in several states, including Colorado. You have New Mexico, California, also Ohio, Wisconsin, Texas, Florida, there's Michigan, and most recently here in Atlanta, Georgia, we have the country's first Black-owned micro home cottage development. And let me give you a glimpse of the new tiny home community here in the metro area. Take a look at this 2-minute video and I'll be right back.
It is a big dream on a small scale. A local developer creating a community of micro homes to make the dream of homeownership affordable at a time when housing costs, well, they just keep going up.
All new this morning, 11 Alive's Ariana Beniz spoke to the developer who's changing the landscape of the housing market right here in Atlanta.
Here, this was nothing.
It was flat.
It was dirt.
Booker T. Washington created a community of his own.
It's time to bring a little bit of that back. It's time to bring back a little bit of that neighborly feel.
South Park Cottage is a neighborhood of 29 micro homes, located 15 minutes from downtown and 5 minutes from the airport. It's the first of its kind in Atlanta and the first Black-owned micro community in the entire country.
In South Park Cottages, we had the spectrum of people buy a home here. You have empty nesters, you have people downsizing, you have millennials, you have Gen Xers just starting out.
The idea started on paper.
That was the original idea of South Park.
Washington's dream is now making owning a home a reality for many. Prices range from $180,000 to $230,000 and about 400 to 600 square feet in size.
The average home in the Atlanta metro area, which is well over $425,000, there is a majority, over 70% of individuals that don't make incomes to meet that level.
People like Lisa Williams who understand the struggles of purchasing a home.
I had lived in a townhome that I had rented for 12 years.
Williams will call South Park Cottage's home. She's a first-time homeowner thanks to Washington and his team, who gifted her a brand new home in the community.
I'm elated. I feel so blessed, and I feel that everything that and I get a little emotional because everything that I went through, it led to this.
This micro neighborhood has also attracted big-time stars.
The way it's structured, you don't feel like you're necessarily in a tiny home.
WNBA star and Olympian Angel McCautry purchased one of the homes as an investment property.
These are affordable homes, but you get the features of $1 million home.
Features like tall ceilings, community walking paths, balconies, and fire pits.
Stormwater drain-off systems that are state-of-the-art. We have solar panels.
And as Washington built his dream, he hopes to expand the community so the reality of owning a home can be attainable for everyone.
We're going to provide them the other option at the same price they would pay for rent to have not a roof, but a roof they own.
They look nice too. Love this project. So the homes are expected to be complete by the end of March. Washington and his team are planning to build the next community of micro homes in Union City. Chesley.
And just to give you my final thoughts, tiny house living is not for everybody, but I do believe that it will continue to flourish and gain momentum well into the future. I believe the tiny house movement is sustainable because people's values have shifted from generations in the past. And by necessity, people are very concerned about the environment, global warming, and the impact of carbon and greenhouse gases. And of course, tiny houses cost a fraction of the price of traditional homes, and they cost less to maintain. And since small spaces use less energy, there will be less to shell out on bills related to the home. Now, for me personally, I would definitely rent a tiny house when I go on vacation in the future, a B&B. And if you're considering buying a tiny house, my advice is to make sure that you do your research and ask yourself, will living in a small space work for you? What are your non-negotiables? What are you willing to sacrifice? And what about being married or thinking about being married and having children? And what tiny house style fits your lifestyle? What about location? Where will you feel safe? Will you feel safe in a rural area? And these are just some things that you need to address when considering a tiny house. And as I prepare to close, I want to share a resource with you. There's a woman by the name of Jewel Pearson who has a YouTube channel called Miss Bohemian Soul. Now, she built her tiny house back in 2015 when tiny house dwellers were considered oddballs. That's certainly not the case today. Now, today she is referred to as the Harriet Tubman of tiny houses, and I'm going to leave a link in the description box below to her channel. Now, I never met her, but I've watched many of her videos, and they are very informative. She offers a number of resources that I believe will be helpful to anyone interested in tiny houses. Now, that's going to wrap up what I have to share today. I hope you found this information valuable. I do want to thank you for staying until the end. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Leave your thoughts and comments below and click that notification bell to receive an alert each time I upload a new video. Until the next time, take care and bye for now.